What's going to be the gimmick for the Nintendo Switch 2? Now before I get into anything, I should say we don't even know if Nintendo's next console will be the Switch 2. As of now, all we know is from this one tweet where it said that the successor to the Nintendo Switch will be announced. I think that's definitely enough for us to assume that Nintendo's next system will be quite similar to the Switch, and in simple terms, a Switch 2. But I've been thinking about what the Switch 2 could really be. Nintendo has never just made a straight up sequel to a system like Xbox or PlayStation, especially not with just the number 2 after the original's name. In recent years, Nintendo always adds some big gimmick to each new system, like the Wii and Wii U, the DS and 3DS. These are obviously sequels to the originals, but add a big kinda gimmick. And Nintendo hasn't always done this, especially with their old home consoles. Each new iteration was more so just an upgraded Nintendo console. From the NES, SNES, N64, and GameCube, those never really had any big gimmicks. And with their handhelds, they also just started out with just upgrades from the Game Boy to Game Boy Advance. That was just an upgrade. No big gimmick there. And even if you want to include the Game Boy Color, that's also just an upgrade. But starting with the DS, I'd say that's where they really started giving each of their mainline systems big gimmicks. I mean, it's even in the name, DS as in dual screen. Besides obviously having better specs than the GBA, the main thing that differentiates it from the GBA is the dual screens. Nintendo would continue on their trend of gimmicks with the Wii. The Wii's gimmick is basically just motion controls. This was a new thing, at least for Nintendo at the time, so they made this a big factor of that console. A lot of Wii games, if not most, had motion controls in some form, or at least had an option for them. The trend continued with the 3DS, which added a 3D element to the gimmick that was already the DS. Then the Wii U added the gamepad as that system's gimmick. Even the Switch is basically a huge gimmick in and of itself. The Switch combines console and handheld into one system, which is crazy considering how Nintendo was releasing both for years separately and just put them both into one. And I'd say the idea turned out amazing. The Switch is limited in terms of power compared to the modern Xbox or PlayStation, but makes up for it in portability. And it's not like Nintendo really needs to compete with Xbox or PlayStation, at least in my opinion. To me, at least since the Wii, Nintendo has always seemed like it's kinda in its own league, and not in the way of being better than Xbox or PlayStation, but more so Nintendo just kinda seems to do their own thing. They're not worried about having the best graphics or most powerful system, and they don't need to. Nintendo sticks to their own thing, and they have a dedicated fan base, and a lot of times cater to a much larger audience than Xbox and PlayStation, which mostly cater to hardcore gamers. And that's why Nintendo usually does things a bit more out of the box. They've realized their audience, and they tend to make things aimed more towards casual gamers, and that includes fun gimmicks. For the record, I'd just like to say, I love Nintendo's gimmicks. Even though sometimes they can seem a bit dumb to some people, I always enjoy them, and this is what's really got me wondering what they're cooking up for the supposed Nintendo Switch 2. What's going to be the gimmick for the Switch 2? Are they even going to do one? These are all questions I've been thinking about. I think it's a given that the Switch 2 is going to be more powerful than the original Switch, and that's definitely something to look forward to. And I've even considered that maybe that's all Nintendo will do with the next system. But honestly, that'd be pretty disappointing to me. Of course I'd love a more powerful version of the Switch. The Switch definitely has its fair share of problems in terms of power, and I really only like to use it for first-party games most of the time because of this, as third-party games just do not run well a lot of times on the system. So needless to say, more power is definitely welcome. That doesn't mean I don't want some kind of new thing to separate the Switch from its original counterpart. I think a big reason Nintendo does these gimmicks is to convince people why it's worth it to buy their consoles, because for a lot of people, especially casuals, which make up a lot of Nintendo's audience, they need a big thing to differentiate the console from the previous one. Like yeah, hardcore gamers and big Nintendo fans such as myself will obviously get the Switch too, even if it's just a Switch that's more powerful, but what really makes those sales is the big gimmick. I mean, think of the Wii. When it was released, it became a cultural phenomenon. Everyone wanted a Wii. And a big reason was because of how fun the motion controls looked and were. The GameCube did not do well, and that's because it was simply just another Nintendo console. People wanted something new at that point, and the Wii delivered. Something to consider though, is that the times have changed. Technology has and is advancing at an alarming rate. When something like the Wii came out, that seemed like such a crazy innovation for gaming, but nowadays it's really nothing too special. Not to say I don't love Wii games today, as well as many others, but from a technical standpoint, the Wii is outdated. Back then, Xbox and PlayStation released their own kind of things to compete with the Wii. Nowadays, we don't see this nearly as much. Xbox has completely abandoned the Kinect and has no form of motion controls at all. Over on the PS5, the controller does have a gyroscope, but it isn't used nearly as much as Nintendo uses a gyroscope with their controllers. We can see that gimmicks aren't wanted as much on other platforms, but Nintendo sticks to their gimmicks, and that's why so many casuals gravitate towards Nintendo time and time again. So even though it seems like gimmicks are becoming a thing of the past, I do think it could be possible for Nintendo to try something new. It might be a little more likely for them to just improve on previous gimmicks though, as it seems like that's what the Switch was going for. I mean, I've always thought of the Switch as kind of a better version of the Wii U. While the Wii U typically had two screens up at once, a big upside to the Wii U was that if someone else was using the TV and you wanted to play your Wii U, you could simply play it in gamepad only mode for most games, and I think anyone can see that that's very similar to the philosophy of the Switch. Considering Nintendo's past of introducing big gimmicks with each new system, I think it's reasonable to assume Nintendo would want to do that again, but also with the times changing, it seems like a better option for Nintendo could simply be to improve the current Switch while adding a smaller gimmick of sorts. Now, I could go over supposed rumors or leaks, but I'm not too sure about those, and I think it'd be more fun to just name a few ideas I can think of that might differentiate the Switch from the Switch 2, or just overall improve the system. For one, I think a smaller, easy gimmick could be a camera and a mic. This wouldn't be the craziest new gimmick for an entirely new console, but if Nintendo wants to play it a bit more safe and keep the Switch 2 pretty similar, this could be a decent option. Something to note though is that the DS got a camera with the DSi, and that wasn't an entirely new console. That was more like a Switch OLED type of situation, so would they really only add this as a new feature for the Switch 2? These would be easy additions to add that would make the console a bit more unique, and although would be only usable in handheld mode, would be cool to have in that circumstance for some games and or apps. If they did include that, I'd say it should also have a camera and voice recording type software included like the DSi and 3DS systems did. And on the topic of that, I'd love it if they could include some more stuff on the system like the DSi and 3DS. One of the biggest complaints about the Switch is the fact that the home screen and UI is just so boring, especially coming from the 3DS and Wii U. I mean, the Wii U wasn't perfect, but it had more personality than the Switch. The Switch doesn't even have music in the eShop or Mii Maker, and I hate how they just threw the Mii Maker to the side and hid it away in the settings. The 3DS had so much more in terms of personality. It was perfect. Themes were a huge thing, and so many people have requested them to come to Switch. The Switch has a theme menu, but only allows you to choose from a basic light and dark mode. Like, we were so close to having themes, but no. Also, not having a simple internet browser on the Switch is a bit weird. Realistically, most people probably would just use their phones, so I get it, but for a portable tablet-like system, I feel like that's just a given. I just like more things like that in general. They may not be the most useful, but they were fun to have and gave the systems more personality. The Switch 2 should definitely address these issues. Needless to say, I'm very excited for Nintendo's next system, and I really hope they make it feel worth buying and not just make it feel like another Nintendo Switch. I do want a new Nintendo Switch, but I don't want just a new Nintendo Switch. I wanted to have that fun Nintendo charm and have some gimmick that'll make me excited to try it out. Though, I do hope it isn't anything that ruins the console either. I think they could come up with some type of middle ground where it's a fun gimmick, but it's not forced into everything like motion controls with the Wii. I can't wait to see how this thing will be once it gets announced. God knows what kind of terrible name they're going to come up with for this thing.